You're listening to The Grind. Well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 13 of The Grind, a disc golf podcast. I'm Josiah. With me, my good friend David. We're going to talk some disc golf.
How's it going, guys?
We have a fun episode lined up for you today. We have a pro tip from Scott Stokely. We are going to talk about putting in the wind, the challenges, solutions maybe, and we are going to review the glorious Kastaplast Berg. No spoiler alert there, well maybe a little bit, but as always, David, got to ask, what are you sipping on and how was your disc golf week?
For a second there, I thought you were saying we're reviewing the Glory disc, and in my brain, I'm just trying to think about, wait, what disc?
You didn't review the Glory?
I don't remember throwing that.
You were supposed to throw the Glory this week, David.
Oh, man. We're sipping on some Ethiopia Guji again this week from, looks like Uraga in Ethiopia. I assume that's going to be the little village within the Guji region. I'm not sure. I didn't do the research. Again, natural processed coffee. It's kind of fun. When you go to a craft coffee shop, typically people that are super nerdy and really into their coffees. Typically, the Ethiopia Guji Natural is kind of that like standard baseline. Like when you're going to a craft brewery and you're, I guess the baseline before was the IPA, but now maybe it's the hazy IPA that people are really looking for. But this is kind of like your hazy IPA of the coffee industry, the craft coffee industry. And so it's one that kind of everybody's looking for as far as a baseline for experimental coffees.
Yeah, kind of get like your take on the hazy if you're going to a bar, like, oh, this is good, it's different than I expected, or this is like really classic, or oh, it's a little bit more West Coast.
Yep, for sure.
But this with coffee. So who's the roaster on this?
The roaster is Harbinger Coffee, and Harbinger Coffee is out of Fort Collins, Colorado. This is actually, I kind of have a list of like 5 roasters in Colorado that I typically go to when I'm talking about Colorado roasters as far as top 5 for me, and Harbinger is one of those roasters that I typically go to. Owner's name is John. Fantastic people serving fantastic coffees across the board. They have definitely very high standards. And man, this is a fun cup. As far as a lot of Ethiopia Gujis, I mean, typically those naturals, you're gonna get those berry notes.
When I think about Guji, I think blueberry.
Yeah, this is a very clean cup. You're getting a lot more of the strawberry notes in there. That's one of the notes on there. Definitely, that's something that sticks out.
It pops for sure.
I get the graham cracker because it kind of has that like almost like a sweet buttery taste.
Yeah.
Along with it, it's a good cup, man. This is honestly probably one of my favorite Gujis that I've had. So,
yeah, I really get the strawberry. I don't think that I've had a coffee where I've gotten a strawberry on my palate quite like that. I can see the graham cracker as well. When you say a clean cup, sometimes people say that and I'm like, oh, I don't really know. But this leaves you with almost no bitterness or acidity at the end. I mean, there's a little bit of acidity for sure that lingers, but it's not like a sour taste. And I don't know, it feels very easy to drink and almost like you're not drinking coffee. If you think about like a classic, medium or dark roast coffee, you kind of have this mouthfeel that lingers that's not super pleasant.
Yep.
And this is just, I hate to use the word in the definition or my poor layman's definition, but this is clean. It's like, It's great.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great definition. I use clean cup often. And I don't realize that like, as far as it's not the most approachable term as far as like communicating. And I feel like you broke that down really well. It's really just, I feel like you can identify a lot of what the flavors within the coffee, the compounds that are there, but there's not a whole lot of other variables, the acidity being whether it's under roasted, over roasted, that are prominent and that are going to stick out. It just is a fantastic cup of coffee. Did a fantastic job, guys.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about it is that it's both really flavorful and clean. I think that's a tough thing because normally I would imagine with the mouthfeel I have at the end that you'd have a weak or like uneventful experience in the actual, when you're actually drinking the coffee. But it's like, no, it's loaded with flavor and then you feel nice afterwards.
Yep. And that's something that you find in a lot of the natural coffees. They'll typically have some of those like more gassy petroleum taste along with the fun fruitiness going on. And with this coffee, you're not really getting that at all. It definitely has that clean taste.
Yeah, it's a great cup. You should definitely check this out. You can order online from them at harbingercoffee.com. It's a fantastic roast, a fantastic bean, and we really appreciate them. They sent us a couple bags to try, and so we're going to have a Columbia from them on the podcast as well down the road. So big thanks to John, and we appreciate you.
Yeah.
How was your disc golf week?
Dude, disc golf week was good. I ended up playing Salt Wash on Sunday.
I'm so jealous you have Salt Wash in your backyard.
I know. It is really nice just to be able to walk back there, especially this time of year. And the evening times during the summer is a lot of fun. Salt Wash is fun. Working on kind of shorter technical shots. Basically, every time I go out there, I'm really trying to shoot 9 down. There's 9 holes. And so I'm trying to get them all. The best I've ever gotten is 7. I had a chance one time at 9, but I missed 2 18-foot putts.
Well,
2 20-foot putts.
Well, we won't. We know that our buddy Ryan listens to this podcast, not Ryan Wilking, and he did throw you off a bit, and he's never going to forgive himself for it, and he shouldn't.
But that would have just been 8 down. But man, fun week, man. I feel like I gotta work on a lot of my technical shots with backhand, trying to hit those lines through the trees. I'm at Salt Wash, and then on Thursday I talked about in the second cup. Got to play around in the wind on Thursday, and I went out with the approach at Snooks of not wanting to go for my best score, but I went out with the approach of just wanting to really learn different shots in the wind and understand what I can do in the wind. That's something I'm really trying to continue to build those concepts in my head so I can go into a tournament feeling confident even if it's really windy. And I feel like I threw about 3 to 4 drives on every hole. And that's really what I focused on. And I did 2 putts per hole as well to make sure that I was figuring out what I wanted to do with my putting in the wind as well.
Yeah, and I'm excited about talking to you about putting in the wind because I feel like it's still an area of weakness for me.
Oh, yeah. Still, I feel like for amateurs, it's going to continue to be an area of weakness. It's something that is so necessary to work on and so necessary to talk about because the more that you talk about it, the more that you build those concepts into your head. But yeah, man, a lot of fun. I feel like I grew a lot as a player this week. I didn't necessarily have great rounds, but I feel like I was able to focus on just kind of growing as a player.
Yeah. Well, I think it is a great round when you get better, even if you don't score well.
Yeah, for sure.
But David's still working around to that concept. He still wants to beat my best score at Watson anytime he goes out there.
One day.
He'll get there. But then I'll beat it again. It was a good week overall. I actually only played disc golf today. It was my first time this week playing. Between being sick and coming off the tournament last week and having in-laws in town and trying to get my taxes done. And honestly, just it's been windy and it's just started to get nice. And I was just like, I've got other things going on. I think sometimes it's really helpful for me to take a little step back. And that way I don't get too burnt out because I'm very obsessive. But what will happen as an obsessive person is I'll get super into something and then I'll ruin it for myself with my obsession. So it was kind of nice to take a little bit of time off. And now I'm super stoked to be playing again. I got to play most of a round today, played a few holes with your brother John, and then had the kids with me, and they revolted about hole 11, so we called it good and went to the playground, but felt really good about my drives. Staying on the second cup, I think that I'm throwing as far as I ever have with less effort than I ever have on the backhand, and so that feels really good and really fun, and I'm excited to see, as I build that in and start to feel more control with it, trying to go for some bigger distance shots. But I feel good about the backhand and pretty good about the forehand as well. And my putting was just a little bit off today, but it's kind of to be expected when you don't play for 2 weeks. It felt fine. It felt clean. It just wasn't quite on target. But yeah, it's been a good week overall and good disc golf day since I didn't play the rest of the week. Well, you want to get into a pro tip?
Let's do it.
Big thanks to Scott Stokely for sending us his pro tip. Scott's story is well documented at this point, but longtime pro disc golfer who went back on tour this year. And I asked him, Scott, what's one thing that keeps AMs and lower level open players from leveling up their games? And he said, having a dominant throw. You should not be backhand dominant or sidearm dominant. You should be 50-50. It's not about backhand and sidearm. It's about throwing the disc with both spins, because each spin gives the disc a mirror image flight from the other. On most shots, one of those flights is more likely to succeed than the other. The hole should determine which delivery you throw with, not you. I choose this because it's one of my largest flaws in my own game. I've always trained equally with both arms and used both, with one exception. When I'm in the woods, I do favor the sidearm because it's more accurate. This is correct for me scoring the best because I avoid missing gaps in the woods, but I do this to compensate for a lack of precision with my backhand accuracy. So it is a flaw in my game. It holds me back. And I felt like that was a really cool and honest tip from him, and kind of an interesting concept to talk about, because you're naturally sidearm or forehand dominant. I'm naturally backhand dominant. What do you think about Scott's pro tip?
I like it in the sense that early on, I mean, the whole reason that I became sidearm dominant was because at the beginning I could throw about 300 feet with my forehand. I could only throw 200 feet to 215 feet with my backhand because I really didn't have a concept for it. And so naturally, I wanted the most distance, and so I just stuck with my forehand. So like, this is what I'm getting the most distance. I'm going to figure this out, and that's what I'm going to roll with. And I became so committed to it that I did get really good at the forehand and really consistent in finding that consistency, but neglected it so much to the point to where, I mean, it's been about 3 years now that we've been playing regularly.
Yeah, I think together we've been playing 3 years consistently. Yep.
Yeah. It's only in this past, 6 to 8 months that I've really started to figure out a backhand. So it took me a lot of time and I'm still, as far as my confidence with my backhand, it's definitely getting up there, but it's not still nowhere near where my forehand is. And so I think if I would have had this concept earlier on in playing and known that, okay, it's not about the distance, it's about understanding what you need the disc to do. I think if I had those concepts built in earlier on, I would have been so consumed about, I want to throw further than all my friends.
Yeah. No, I think this is interesting, and I definitely think that when you lack a tool, it really hurts you. And you were talking about on the second cup just how having a backhand now makes playing in the wind so much easier.
Oh, yeah.
You want to kind of expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, having beforehand, when I was so reliant on the forehand, playing in the wind, it got to the point to where I half the time felt like I didn't even have a shot because the wind was going to do so much damage to the way that the wind was coming at the disc that it wasn't going to fight the wind or do in the wind what I wanted it to do. And now knowing that I can adjust and use a backhand with a different spin and having the flight plate on the other side of the wind, it opens up a realm of possibilities of what you can do in the wind, which is a complete game changer when you feel like you are playing the wind's not playing you.
Yeah.
So
I love that line. That's a great way of looking at it. Yeah, I think it's been big for me to have a forehand. I think at our last tournament, I would say over half of my birdies were forehand or sidearm. And that's because some of the shorter holes, that's what's required, but it was also windy. And so it was nice having that. For me, inside 300, I feel really confident with my forehand. Outside that, I kind of need to throw a bit of a flex, and so it depends on the line. I feel like I can get my forehand out to 350, 325 consistency with occasional 375 plus. That's usually got to be on a flex. But I think inside 300, I feel really confident with my forehand, and I think it makes life so much easier when you don't have to throw something against its natural tendency. So the disc has a natural tendency. If you throw backhand, right-handed, you're going to throw it with, what is that, clockwise spin. Mm-hmm. It's going to fade left, forehand or left-handed backhand, counterclockwise spin. So I think it makes total sense. I think the hard thing for me is you only have so much time. And when it comes down to it, there's some shots that are either neutral to what disc to throw, what line to throw, backhand or forehand, or the difference is it's not like a 70-30 chance. It's like a 55-45 backhand forehand. And so then it's kind of a matter of, if I'm way better than you at the backhand and you're way better than me at the forehand, but you've got a decent backhand, I've got no forehand, whatever that is, on some courses, it won't matter that much because a lot of the holes, I can just throw a backhand every time. Then there's some courses that it's going to matter a ton. And, Scott's talking about playing the woods. I feel like the woods and the wind is a big part of it. But I think there's this tension between, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's this tension between working on what you're good at and working on your weaknesses. And I feel like this is almost, we've gotten a couple pro tips, James Proctor being one that said, hey, look, I wish I would have started on the forehand earlier because I'm backhand dominant. Scott's saying, hey, I wish I was more confident in the backhand, been building my backhand more because I'm a little too sidearm dominant. And so that's from both sides. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here, but I think there's this tension to me between building those skills you're weak at versus honing the thing that you're naturally better at. And, Scott's a great player and he's been around for a long time. He knows a lot of things. And so I want to take him at his word for it, but I also just naturally imagine that there's some balance between building your strengths and honing your weaknesses. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think there's definitely a balance. I mean, that's kind of going from the pro to amateur thing as far as the pros. I mean, you're devoting your life, you're devoting your time to honing your craft. And so you have the time to put that energy into it. I think as an amateur, when we're balancing not only our work life, but our home life with our family, and we're getting around it once a week or whatever it might be, it's a lot more difficult to hone all those different skills because we don't necessarily have the time to do that. And so I think it really comes down to what you feel like you want out of your game. Like going back to earlier on talking about, like, what is it for you having fun? If it's fun for you just to go out and continue to hone that craft of throwing your backhand because you just enjoy playing your home courses and whatever it might be, and that's what you rely on, I mean, by all means. But I mean, if you really enjoy getting better in the challenge of learning different skill sets within the game, I think you can get for some people it's going to be really fun just to keep that simple mindset. Other people you might get bored with the simplicity of that, and you want to expand your game, expand different concepts. And so I think really it comes down to the individual and what you want out of disc golf. Yeah, and I think we're kind of in that middle. Like for me, I feel like I do have a lot more time oftentimes to go out and get rounds in. And so I've really enjoyed lately playing more rounds of learning different concepts. Before I would just push them aside because of like, I don't actually really care about that. But now that I've gotten into playing tournaments more so and competing in advanced, I definitely have gotten more, okay, I want to compete at the top level in advanced. And so if I want to compete there, then I have to understand these other concepts. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to compete with these guys.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I have a guy that I work with who plays disc golf quite a bit, and he literally just plays with whatever disc he found that didn't have a name on it. And then if he finds another one, he'll try that one and see if it replaces it. So he'll basically play with like 2 or 3 discs, but he'll basically throw one the whole time because it's the disc he's grooving with or whatever. And I carry 24, 25 discs on a casual round most days, So I do think there's a certain degree of, hey, you have to find what level of interest you have in building your game and where you find your enjoyment. But if you said, hey, I just want to get better and my horizon for getting better is 10 years or something long, because I'd say if your horizon for getting better is like 2 months, then I probably wouldn't try to build a whole new skill set. Then I'd say, yeah, it makes sense to do both. I think the other thing with the forehand and the backhand, I think this is true about the overhand as well, especially, is the longevity. And I think a lot of pros are moving to more backhand dominant perspectives. Like I've heard Macbeth talk about it, and you have Eagle with his injury. He's only throwing backhand because of the injury. I think there is something mechanically gentler on your body with the backhand that seems to be pretty consistently demonstrated. And so I do think there is some degree of maybe, I mean, Scott's certainly not 20, and he's doing fine with forehand dominant, and he's playing well and he's healthy. But I do wonder if there is also a certain degree to which you're kind of putting yourself more of a baseball pitcher than a batter, and the longevity, if you're throwing 12 forehand bombs a day at a tournament and more in practice, I don't know. There's just something physically there that I think we don't know. Disc golf's so young, we don't really know enough about the mechanics of it and the long-term implications of injury and such.
Yeah, I think for me with the forehand, the temptation is to rip on your forehand. I've been ripping a lot on the forehand with Nate Sexton Firebird. Shout out to Nate Sexton.
Yeah, Nate, since you listen every week, send us a pro tip, man. We got Firebirds to review and give away.
The control that I get with the Firebird is so much so that if I can use it, I want to use it. And so I've been recently pumping it out to about 330, but I am ripping on it. And I just started noticing every once in a while I get in the bad habit of ripping on the disc more than actually having good mechanics. I start noticing not necessarily a pain, but like a discomfort in my elbow, which I assume is going to lead to some pain and not good things later on. And so that's when I've been a little bit more conscious lately of slowing down and being okay with not trying to, because it's easier when you know you can just rip on the disc and it's going to do what you want it to do. The temptation is to rip on it, and I think which leads to those elbow injuries.
You just need to go play some more sea-level disc golf to remind you to be a little smoother and more casual off the tee.
For sure.
I think David's just got such a powerful and clean forehand that you can put an overstable disc out pretty far, and that's very reliable and consistent rather than taking something that's more neutral. But I do think that does, like you said, require a lot more from your body. Yeah. And when you're playing 3 and 4 shots on a course, and you're doing Spike Heiser flat top Firebirds or whatever, or throwing a Wraith on a Spike Heiser on a 200-foot hole so you can avoid throwing the backhand turnover. Yeah. So I do think there's some longevity concerns. I think the big thing for me that I think I would take from this is you want to not have a weakness. And if sometimes by working on that, you can turn a weakness into a strength. Like I think for the intermediate field, my forehand is good to great, and it's my secondary skill. And I think that if I worked on it a bit more, I feel like I'd have an advanced level forehand to go with what I think is, on a good day is an advanced level backhand, and I think that that's worth pursuing for me. I still think practically for me, it's going to depend a lot on how I'm feeling about either of those skills or tools. Like last year, I leaned on the forehand because my backhand was a mess. And this year, I feel like, no, my backhand feels really good. And so I'm more likely to lean on that. But I think right now, I feel like I don't have to force throws on the backhand. I do for fun on second shots. I've got the the Axiom Paradox, which if we'll probably review at some point. It's so stupid flippy. It's so fun to throw like a hyzer flip that basically takes a forehand line on the backhand. But in reality, it's much better for me to throw a forehand in that instance because it's more reliable with a more stable disc. And so that's what I'm doing. I think that, I really appreciate that Scott's willing to just be like, hey, this is something for me that's personal and that I'm working on. He didn't pick a pro tip that was like, here's the reason that I'm way better than all you guys. It's like, here's something that I'm working on. And I love, he finished off what he sent with this. He said, to this day, I'm always trying to improve my backhand accuracy to become as good as my sidearm. But so far, it hasn't caught up. Maybe when I'm 53, I will. And I love that perspective. And I want to be like this, throughout our lives. We're not in our 20s anymore, but we still are pretty close to our athletic peak. But this idea of like constantly improving is one of the reasons that disc golf, I just can't get enough of it. I probably will never beat Paul Macbeth in a round. I might take the box from him a few times, but I'll probably never beat him in a round. But I do think there is this idea of just the mental health and just the physical enjoyment of like working on something and getting better at something. For me, is one of the things I love about disc golf. And I feel like it's cool to see somebody like Scott who's not satisfied with his game, and he's going to keep working on it.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, you want to talk putting in the wind?
Let's do it.
I think that if I could make 25-foot like ripping headwind putts every time, I'd probably give up circle 2 putts altogether. Because I feel like when I get to that 20 to 25 footer in the headwind, I feel like I have such a hard time. And I want to kind of talk through putting in the wind, and just kind of some things that work for us and some things that we're trying, and just some mental side as well. Like, how do you approach it? Because sometimes I don't have the confidence that I should.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something both that we're really trying to figure out. This last tournament in Delta was one of the first times in a tournament that I really had to focus on putting in the wind, and actually having a couple holes that found some success, and both times were actually on comebacker putts just to save my par. There was two that I made when it was pretty dang windy, either a crosswind putt or a headwind putt, from about like between that 22 to 25 range. And the one thing that I feel like helps me out the most is going back, because I feel like when the wind is a variable, all the things that you revert back to start seeping into your head. And one of those things for me is babying the putt. Mm-hmm. I'm so nervous about the wind that I try to guide the disc to the basket, and so I just kind of baby it. And then when I don't put enough spin on the disc, the wind just has a heyday with the putt. And you name it, wherever it went, it is further away from the basket than where I started from. When I'm actually focusing on finishing at the basket and really pushing and getting that spin directly towards the basket, I'm showing Josiah the motion.
You guys, it's beautiful.
I almost punched him. But when I'm focused on that, getting back to, okay, I really need to make sure that I'm getting the spin on the disc and snapping at the basket. And then on top of that, thinking about which angle I want to put it on, that's when I think I'm actually finding the success. And the reason why on those two holes that I think I made the comebacker putts is because I made the mistake on the first putt and I adjusted on the second putt.
I had that happen to me in round as well. And they were like, you were really angry at the basket. I was like, no, I just wanted to follow through.
Yeah.
It's cool because what you're saying is basically like, do the thing you normally do, just more.
Yeah. I think it's just the wind becomes a distraction in your mind. And I think when we have distractions in our life, we naturally get distracted from the fundamentals or what we know we're capable of doing.
Yep.
And yeah, the wind's going to impact the disc, but that doesn't mean you cannot make it in the basket.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And I think that's why, once again, our buddy Calvin Heimberg says, hey, there is no wind. And I think it is this mental decision of, I'm going to, obviously he practices in the wind, but he's going to make a decision about how he's going to putt, and then he's going to putt as if there is no wind. And I think that is, to me, when I have the most success, is when before I get, and we've got an AM's Helping AM part here that we're going to talk through that's going to talk about this, but before I get to my marker, I've already kind of worked out, hey, it's going to be a headwind putt, and so then I'm going to commit to it. Whatever the putt is, I'm going to commit to it. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to go in. Sometimes that it's going to be disastrous because the wind's going to pick it up and throw it 40 long or something. But in general, I feel like when I get really messed up in the wind is when I walk up to the putt, I get ready to putt, and then I start thinking about the wind. And then when I'm thinking about the wind, like you said, I'm not thinking about that one chain link I want to hit. I'm not visualizing the putt going into the basket. So I think that's huge on the mental side. What about on the physical side? We'll talk headwind because that's the one that bothers me the most. Normally, most people's putts are going to rise in a headwind, drop in a tailwind. That's assuming that you putt nose up. If you putt nose down, especially if you spin putt nose down, you're not going to see that. So if sometimes my spin putt gets nose down, I have to, you'll see it hit, like the very bottom of the pole or like not even get to the basket because the wind just takes it. So let's start headwind. What's your general like physical approach to it?
The way that I generally putt is I have a slight natural hyzer to my release, and when I'm putting in the wind, I actually go away from that slight hyzer.
You try to have it flat.
I try to keep it as flat as possible, and I actually practice putting at home. Also I practice putting with my hyzer putt, but then I also practice at home, so I have that feeling of just putting it straight to the basket. It's not as consistently reliable as the hyzer for me. Putting it flat to the basket, I feel like having that concept in my head has helped me feel more comfortable when there is wind putting flat to the basket.
I think that's so good too if you have any crosswind element to that headwind putt, because a crosswind on the hyzer, if it's coming under your disc, is going to push it way left.
Mm-hmm.
If it's coming from the other direction, it's going to push on the top of this, push it way down.
Yep.
So I do think that flat putt makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And so typically in the headwind, if I'm keeping it pretty flat, and sometimes I do go nose down and it just slaps it to the ground, but I do try to keep it flat, and I try to aim towards the bottom of the basket. I don't aim at the bin itself. I aim just above it, so I'm not trying to hit the center chains, because I am expecting it to rise some, but I am hoping that I'm going to throw it flat enough to where it's not going to be impacted significantly by that.
Yeah.
But knowing that more than likely I'm going to err on one side or the other.
I like the idea of still aiming at something in the basket for the headwind putts, because I think if you aim at the cage and then you hit the cage, that's so annoying.
Yep.
Like
it's so frustrating.
I'd rather aim at the center of the basket and go over the basket than aim at the cage and hit the cage. I don't know if that's just my mental side, but I think that I agree on the keeping the disc really flat. I think both nose angle and wing angle, just trying to keep it super neutral. And then I think you said this earlier, but just trying to have clean spin on the putt. And I think spin, especially in the headwind and crosswind, really protects the disc from getting affected. When you have a wobbly putt, the wind will just have its way with it most of the time, unless you have just a ton of speed. So I think having clean spin, and then for me lately, what I've been trying to do is having clean direct spin, but not putting too much speed on it. I usually will put a little harder in the headwind just so it has enough speed to get to the basket before the wind affects it. But I try not to put so much pace on it that if I miss, I've got like a crazy long putt back. And also, if I try to putt too hard, a lot of times I'm not going to have that clean release.
Have you seen Macbeth's new approach in the wind with his putting?
No.
His putt is in the wind. So there's some science behind it, supposedly. And I haven't done the research or reading about it to know much about it, but he is doing more of a flutter putt in the wind. It was interesting, because I would think that no matter what, that's not going to be okay. There's something about the science behind it that it supposedly fights the wind the best. And I haven't done enough research.
Is that in all wind, or?
I don't know.
Okay,
I just remember them talking about it on the last, when it was windy in a tournament. They just briefly talked about his approach.
I remember hearing, I don't know if it was Jomez or somebody talking about that now that you're saying it. And I think it had something to do with catching the chains better.
Okay.
I think that like when you get to Macbeth's level, that makes sense. For me, I can't putt a wobbly putt into a stiff headwind know what it's going to do.
Yeah. I can't even put a wobbly putt. My wife does kind of a little wobbly putt sometimes, and I don't know how she's able to do it, but
you don't even know how to make a wobble.
Yeah. I don't even know.
That's a problem I'm sure a lot of people would like to have. So let's talk tailwind, because that's kind of the opposite. I think most people feel better about tailwind putts, but what do you do for a tailwind?
Tailwind, I'm definitely trying to make sure I get it up, because the tailwind's definitely going to knock it down. Even if you're getting it flat going to the basket, it just feels like the tailwind's just going to slap it. So definitely my goal is to get it up and know, because even if I miss the basket, it's going to slap down just past the basket. And so I'm not super, I feel like in a tailwind, I'm definitely not super worried about the putt. I'm not thinking about it as much. I'm just more concerned about making sure I get it up.
Yeah, give it a chance.
Just give it a chance, yeah.
I totally agree. I think sometimes I'll try to get the nose down a bit in a tailwind if it's a ripping tailwind, so that the disc doesn't get pushed down as much. But normally my approach is just give it a ton of height and hope that I just have it slam in, which is a fun putt when it works.
Yeah.
I don't think that I worry too much about tailwind putts. I totally agree. I think that the only thing that gets frustrating is when you don't give it enough height, or you give it a little too much nose up and you don't even get to the basket. And so I just try to avoid that. Crosswind is fun to me, but it's also kind of challenging. Usually you end up with some kind of quartering wind, so you have to kind of combine these takes. But what do you do for crosswinds? You can take in both directions. Do you just try to keep it flat and do your normal putt, or do you make any adjustment?
I feel like I'm still kind of trying to figure that out for myself, because I definitely do different things at different points. And I'm not sure if it's because I feel like the wind is stronger at times than other times. But there's definitely times to where if I'm putting from further out and I know the crosswind is pushing to the left, I'll put it out further to the right on a slight hyzer when knowing that the disc is going to be pushed into the basket. And so I'm definitely kind of playing that hyzer in the wind. And I've messed around with some anhyzer putts in the wind on a crosswind as well, just seeing what I can do with the disc. And so I feel like that's definitely one that I'm still trying to work on. I mean, keeping it flat is definitely something that can help out with some good spin on it and committing to the basket. But yeah, that's something that I'm still kind of starting to build concepts in my head for. So
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't think it's one that I have a clear game plan for every time. And I think part of that's because at different distances and different wind speeds and quartering and stuff, it's hard to have a solution as an AM lined up for all those. I think one thing that I do that I think is helpful occasionally is I'll pick the angle that will slam the disc into the basket on a shorter putt rather than rise it. So if you have a left to right, I'll sometimes do a hyzer high and let that crosswind actually push the disc down into the basket. Or if you've got it left to right, or sorry, right to left, then I would do an anhyzer and let it push it into the basket. And I think that's just helped with some spit outs and other issues you sometimes have with the crosswind. If you put it high in the basket, a lot of times with the crosswind, it won't stay. If it's left to right, then the right side, or right to left.
I had one of those at Snooks yesterday on hole 1. I putted straight into the center chains on the left, like just maybe slightly to the left, and it just bounced straight out, and the crosswind just pushed it out to the left side.
Yep. So that's one of the reasons, not from a distance, because I don't have enough control to keep it on the ante or the hyzer, or feel good about that in the wind. Well, sometimes I'll use the hyzer on the crosswind, like you said, especially on a longer putt to kind of push it in the basket. But I do think I use that action to kind of have it get into the cage rather than in the top of the chains. But other than that, I think the biggest thing for me is to not get tripped up mentally by it, and then to follow through confidently, and to also just accept that, hey, it's hard to putt in the wind. Frisbees fly on air, and the air is moving in sometimes swirly ways, and so you can't always perfectly predict what the disc is going to do in the wind, and there has to be a certain sense of, acceptance of the arbitrariness of life and wind, I think, when you're putting, and also confidence despite that.
Yeah. Is there at any point that you switch from using your traditional putter? I know you and I both putt with a Wizard. Is there at any point in a tournament or practice round that you're switching to, you're back to bagging your zone. Is there any point that you switch to any other disc with putting, or are you always sticking with the Wizard?
I think that, so in our crazy windy first Fruta tournament, or first friend tournament when we played Snooks, I putted the zone a ton in the wind, and I was rocking it. And then I tried it again, another super windy round, and my misses were going really far from the basket because I was getting like a bit of skip, and I think the disc was just faster. And so I think in general, my approach is to try to, whenever possible, putt with a Wizard, even into the headwind, and not change anything, because I think that I just don't know that I want to have that mental exercise of switching discs. But if it's stupid ripping, I probably would putt a zone or even a Firebird like disc, especially on a shorter putt. I think the other thing I do occasionally is on a shorter putt that I think I'm more likely to do, honestly, is to putt upside down. It's a strange feeling because it's a different putt, but I feel like it's much less affected by the wind, and it's not going to rise, so you can putt a little bit higher. And so when there's just a stupid wind and I've got a short putt, I've been putting upside down a little bit, and I feel really good about that out to about 15 feet. But in a tournament, I probably would only do that inside like the bullseye or 12 feet. What about you?
Yeah, I like the upside down putt that you do. It's one that I have tried to begin to build a concept for, but I'm not confident enough in it yet to actually pull it out in a tournament.
Yeah, and that's not something I would recommend working on unless you live somewhere super windy, because I think it's one of those things that's a very random skill.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have occasionally.
Yeah, for sure. There was 2 times at the Delta tournament that I actually putted with my zone, and I for the life of me, I know I made one of them, but I don't remember what happened to the other one.
How far out were you?
About 20 feet. and it was ripping pretty good. I think it was typically in a headwind is when I would.
Yeah, that's when I would do it for sure.
Switching it over to it. But I think I actually began thinking about using the zone primarily because of that early on friends tournament when seeing you find success with the zone. And I that friends tournament, I had zero concept of what to do in the wind, and I only had a forehand at the time. So I was so frustrated with my round. I think I was putting at one point with my PD2, and I still couldn't do anything. My PD2 would fly 50 feet from the basket when I would putt. And so I gave up.
I think that's the big thing for me is there's a certain wind speed at which my wizards are super beat up. They just won't penetrate the wind well enough, cleanly enough without a perfect putt to just get to the basket without me putting a ton of power on. And so those are the points that I'd be more likely to put a zone. But I'm also sometimes more likely to lay up and just say, okay, I'm just going to put this under the basket and move on in those cases, because I still feel like, I don't know, I don't need every head, like I don't need to make a 30-foot headwind putt to win most rounds. And if I just lay up, I'm more likely to take strokes when it's that windy. But I'm looking for in my bag, I don't want to add a disc for it, but I tried the Berg a bit for it. We'll talk about the Berg a little later for a headwind putt. And I actually felt like I like it at distance. I didn't like it close as much as I expected. I don't know why that is. I felt more confident with my wizards getting that spin. And I've tried the zone. I've got a base plastic zone in my bag, and I think that's probably what I'm going to mess around with for that. Just a little bit better ability to penetrate the wind. I haven't been playing in enough crazy brutal wind to need it, but I think I may mess with it a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of putting in the wind is knowing when to lay up, because I think you're right. The 30-foot or 30-foot headwind putts, you're not going to have to make those necessarily in a tournament in order to keep up with everyone. And pitching to the basket and taking whether it's a par or a bogey, I think is a wiser choice than having to, if you end up 3-putting just to get to the basket.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this too is just, I think the zone may be a better approach, but I want to feel confident in it and not that I'm all moving away from what I know and what I trust. And so it's not really whether or not I think it's a better play. It's just what I practice. So I think for me, I want to mess with it more. And part of that means I need to practice really, like Westlake is a good one when it's really windy, because you have some raised baskets on like mounds and stuff. And those are ones that will really punish you if you miss. And so you can get a sense of, okay, this penetrated the wind well, but when I missed, it went too far. Whatever. I feel like there's some good, and the wind usually is, you're not protected at all. So I want to mess with it more. I think in general, though, I think I want to stick with what works out of the wind, in the wind, unless it's absolutely crazy. And then just try to adjust my spin and my commitment level to account for the fact that, it's a little tougher to get it in.
For sure.
Speaking of the Berg, you ready for the what was that disc review?
Let's do it.
We've got the Kastaplast Berg. It is a 1 speed. You heard that right. 1 glide, 0 turn, and 2 fade. Approach disc, putter, whatever a 1 speed is. I bagged the Berg. I've sung some of its praises, so no one's going to be too surprised by my review. But David, you got to throw it for the first time, right?
Yeah, I've actually been curious about asking you about throwing yours before, but I've never actually thrown it before. So it was fun to do this one.
What'd you think of it?
Dude,
it's different.
Yeah, it's different. It's a completely different feel in your hand. It has kind of, I guess the center of it is more indented in, so it's got a pretty solid, dome around the edges, would you say?
Yeah, it's got like a bit of a thumb track.
Yeah.
And then it's got like a bit of some of them more than others, but it raises back up in the center.
Yep. Dude, pretty fun. I threw quite a bit on the backhand and the forehand. I liked it both with my backhand and forehand. I threw at multiple. I think I was throwing 3 of yours in different plastics.
Yeah. So Kastaplast Plastics, they had a recent change to some of their naming, but you threw the K3, which is their base plastic. It's just a beautiful base plastic. The K1 Soft, which used to be called K2, which is more of a gummy plastic, and the K1, which is still got some tack and some gumminess to it, but much stiffer than the K1 Soft.
Yeah. Definitely get it not having much glide. but also there's kind of a predictability about that. It's just going to kind of fall in the direction that you throw it, which is very nice. There are 2 holes that I really liked it on at Snooks. Hole 5 was a fun one for me to throw this on.
Yep.
Kind of a tunnel shot down to the basket at like 220 feet, 230.
It kind of has a ridge on the left of the basket. If you throw the backhand, it will fade out, oftentimes way away from the basket. You kind of want something that just stops.
Yep. And then hole 8, the one that I like to avoid throwing the 200-footer to throw a massive forehand spike hyzer at it.
Did you throw the flick or the backhand?
I threw the backhand with the Berg, and I threw it on a slight anhyzer, and so it pushed to the right, and it had that predictable finish to get back to the basket. And with one of them, I ended up parking it, and it was so. I love the disc, man. Very predictable. It's something that I could definitely see myself messing around with. The one thing that I envy the most, I think, about your ability to throw the Berg is your touch with it. You do like kind of a little forehand like touch, like kind of run at the basket sometimes, or just a little like forehand touch approach. That's one thing that I feel like I'm very confident in my forehand game, but as far as slowing and controlling my speed, that's something that I feel like you definitely have over me in the forehand game. And I feel like the Berg is something that you can play around with in that. And I'm definitely jealous of that aspect of your game.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I'm going to give you guys a pro tip. Not that I'm a pro, but if you want to really master forehand touch shots, don't use your wrist to control the speed. Use your fingers. If you generate the power from your throw with your fingers first and then let that guide your wrists and the rest of your body, you can have much better touch and control of the forehand. And I think that, honestly, between the Berg's low speed and low glide and that little adjustment in my brain to how I control it, I feel really confident that if I throw that little baby, it's like a baby Annie, a little bit nose up, I won't be further than 15 feet from the basket, anywhere inside like 150 feet with an open shot.
It's frustratingly consistent.
Yeah, but it takes a little bit to dial in because it is a different disc. You're used to the disc gliding a bit more, fading a bit more. I feel like the Berg, that 2 fade to me, I totally agree with the 1 speed, 1 glide, 0 turn. I think the 2 fade, did you feel like the stiffer one, the K1, the bright blue one, faded like a 2 fade? Because that was the most stable one.
They were all fairly comparable. To be honest with you, it was a lot harder for me to figure out exactly the stabilities of them because of how windy it was when I was playing.
Oh, no, that makes sense.
And so it definitely impacted how I was throwing it.
No, I think that the 2 fade to me, maybe a fresh K1 will have that. I think a K3, once it's beat up, is honestly a 1100, and then you get maybe a little bit more fade from the premium plastics. My first and only ace was a Berg on Palisade 19, which is like a 220-foot hole. Oh, this is a great story.
None of us saw it.
This is a great story. I feel like this story probably makes sense here. Why not? So, my only ace. So, I've been playing for over 10 years, and I'm not very good at acing. I don't know what it is. I'm decent at disc golf. I'm not very good at acing. We're playing, a big group of us, probably like 8 of us or so.
Something like
we're playing. And 5 of my closest friends, when we got to the last hole, went to go hunt Pokemon, playing Pokemon Go. David was in that group.
We were doing a raid.
I don't know all the terminology, but it seemed very important. And then Micah went to go look for his disc, and Ryan, which we always give a hard time on the show about not playing disc golf anymore, and I went to the hole, and we were just kind of bored, so we're just going to go ahead and throw our drives. And I looked at Ryan. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I aced it while they were gone? And I went up and threw my Berg on this beautiful backhand Annie over the water through this pretty tight double Mando and slammed in the chains. And it was just perfect. I felt a little bit bad because I knew that David would probably feel bad for missing my one and only ace. But I also was just like this funny thing where I was like, wouldn't it be funny? And then I did it. And so I just left it in the basket.
You didn't even tell us.
They got up and threw their drives, and they're like, wait,
There's a disc in the basket.
And I have this sense that David still is a little bit unsure of whether or not Ryan and I just ran and put a disc in the basket just to mess with them for playing Pokemon Go. Like, I think he trusts me in life quite a bit, but I think there is this lingering doubt of like, is it just a lie?
It was pretty fantastic. I just remember that moment seeing the disc in the basket and trying to figure out how it got there. And then when you said that, I was like, no, you're messing with us.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And you have to throw it so high with the Berg to get it to drop in. But yeah, I think that it's a fun disc. It's very different. I think that it's a disc that it takes some getting used to. But once you dial it in, I think it's a very useful disc because it has a ton of high-speed stability. If you throw it cleanly, you're not going to turn it over on the forehand or backhand very easily. But also not a ton of fade. And whenever I can find a disc like that, especially with me for my game, I like to throw straight at the basket. A lot of times in order to get to the basket on a straight line, you got to throw an understable disc on a little bit of flip up. And the Berg is very unique because you can throw it pretty flat and have it basically just drop out of the sky rather than fade hard left or right.
Yeah. We were talking about putting earlier. Is this something that you ever putt with?
I like it for very specific putts, like on a mound.
Okay.
I like it because if I miss, I'm usually going to stay on the mound. I can take like a high run at it. And then I really like it if I'm throwing a really downhill putt that I need to drop.
Okay.
But it's once again, like, I think it's fun to putt with. I think it's useful to putt with. I think if I had all the time in the world, I may really work on it on my Circle 2 putts just to practice like taking a 60 or 70 foot run and not having to worry about much of a comeback. But I just don't have enough time to practice it, and so in the round I'm usually going to go with what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, I was actually messing around with putting them in the headwind, going back to putting.
So what did you think of it in the headwind?
I actually felt like I had better control of it than my Wizard in the headwind.
It's strange because it's so different in terms of a feeling disc, but it feels great to putt with.
Yeah. Oh, it does. It definitely feels like it'll be more predictable in a headwind, and that's why I wanted to try it. Yeah, and so I feel like that gives you a whole nother variable to what you can do with the disc. Yeah,
some other little shots that I use it for. So I use it for like a lot of forehand approaches. I talked about my baby Annie. I also like it for big Annies to get around stuff. I feel like it's very useful for that. David's seen some of those shots I think I've annoyed him with, which is you think there's no way to get to it because you're having to lean out or be on your knee and reach way over, and you need the disc to do the opposite spin or the opposite that the spin wants it to do. So for my forehand, that would be I need it to finish left. And I feel like it does a really good job of that. And I think the other thing I like it for is spike hyzers. Like you have to get over a little tree or a big bush or something or over a branch, and you don't want it to go far or skip. I feel like I really like that backhand especially. And then it's also a really fun roller. You can get it to carry straight for a really long time. I do it a lot of times just for fun on holes, and I'll park like 250-foot holes, 220-foot holes regularly with the Berg just because it's super straight roller, and then it doesn't have a big, when you throw a driver or something on the roller, a lot of times once it gets on edge or once it starts leaning over, it will move really far left or right, and the Berg pretty much just rolls straight and then falls over. So I think it's a super useful disc. I used to struggle with whether or not I should bag a Berg because I do think like a Wizard does a lot of similar things on a backhand. It's a little bit more glidey, but it's honestly like the feel is very different. But I think I was like, oh, I can throw Wizard's backhand just as well as I can throw the Berg. And is it worth having this slot in my bag? Because it's a weird slot. It's a 1-speed approach disc. But now that I've got it dialed in, I feel like my game, maybe partially because I've built my game around it, but it also feels now like I'm inseparable from it. Like if I couldn't throw a Berg, we talked about it. If I had to pick between the Crave and the Berg, I'd probably pick the Berg. I think that was like episode 5 or 6 or something. But I don't know. It's just such an interesting disc. And there's I think that it's a disc that's gotten a lot of hype lately and a lot of hate lately. And it's a polarizing disc. But if you just take all of that aside and you just say, does it feel really good in the hand? Yeah, it's weird, but it feels really good in the hand to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think it feels very good in the hand. But yes, it's different feeling than most of the discs you put in your hand.
Yeah. Does it fly well? Yeah, it flies well. It just flies different. It's not going to go that far. Like I think max with a Berg, I'll probably throw it. Like if I'm really under 200 is on a full like backhand run up is usually, I may push it to like 225. I can get maybe a little more than that on an Annie, but I'm usually going to use it under 200 feet. So it is a unique slot and a unique disc, but I think it's a good disc. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure.
You want to give it a rating?
Yeah.
First, our rating system. I always forget. David and I will give it a score, 1 to 5. Some of our scores to 10. 1, it's just not that great of a disc. 2, it's a okay disc, but there's better options out there. 3, it's a good disc, but it doesn't stand out. 4 is it's fantastic, but it's not making my bag. And 5 is it's going in the bag. So David, what's your rating?
I'm going to go 4.5, man.
Man, you're up there.
Yeah.
I heard nothing from you on the Berg, so I kind of figured you weren't really a fan.
No, it's actually... So I talk about commitment with my discs. This is one thing. If I had to pull a disc out of my bag, it's probably the Luna that would end up coming out. And the reason why is the Berg, I think, if I can really learn that touch shot that you have with your forehand with it, and I think it would take a lot of time and energy putting into it, but I think I could throw it just as well. I use my Luna for my throwing putter. I could throw it just as well as I throw my Luna, if not maybe slightly better. And I also can use it on a flick a little bit as a touch flick.
It's not just a one-side disc.
Yes, it's not just a one-side disc. And so I feel like it opens up another possibility in my game that I could learn. And we're talking about those having different shots that Stokely was talking about. I think it opens up possibility for me. And that's the reason why it makes it enticing. But yeah, it's not something that's going in my bag right now, but it's something that I could see myself in the future considering.
I think it's worth trying out. I just think it's, there's going to be this list of discs that is going to grow for you, which is going to be like, okay, all these discs felt really good, but I didn't really want to work on them tournament season. And so then there's going to be some opportunities to mess with them. I'm going to give it a 5. I love the Berg. I think I bought it initially. There's a lot of hype from like the Kastaplast crazies. I think I've been throwing them for 2 years now. Even back then, there was a lot of hype for it. And I think it was kind of an on again, off again relationship at first where I was like, oh, I get all these good shots with it. It took me a little while to dial in, but now that it's dialed in, I can't imagine not having it. And you should check one out. I personally would recommend the base plastic K3 to start. It feels great, and I think it's the most Berg that a Berg is in terms of both the high speed and low speed stability, meaning it's very stable through the flight, but it's not overstable and it just dies out. I love the K1 Soft and the K1 as well, but the K3 to me is what I'm bagging most days, and I love it. Once it gets beat up a little bit, it gets maybe a little less high speed stability, but I like it. And you can get, Scott Stokely has his tour series K3 Bergs at scottstokely.com. They get a beautiful stamp. They feel great. They're just typical K3 Bergs, but with a cool stamp. And you can support Scott on his tour. You could just go to scottstokely.com and find the Berg. He's got some harps and some other discs out there as well. Or maybe in addition, you can win this one. We're going to give away a Scott Stokely Berg on our Instagram page. So just look when this episode drops for the episode post. Anything else with the Berg?
No, it's a great disc.
Sweet. Well, we have our AMs helping AMs. This week we have Christopher, and just want to play his recommendation.
Hey David and Josiah, it's Christopher. Loving the podcast, keep rocking it out. I wanted to share one of my tips that I've gathered from various pros in their chats on YouTube or podcasts, plus a little spin for myself that I think can really help someone in a tournament setting or casually playing on course blind or one that they have played weekly. And that is, when do you start thinking about your putt? And the best answer to that to me is after your approach shot. So you do your approach shot, you're 15, 20 feet left of the pin. That is when you start gathering hints of what you need to do to sink the putt. Such as, do you know if it's a slight uphill, downhill, or is it flat? Will you need to putt in a different position they're used to, like having to switch to straddle? Or is there a low ceiling? By casually answering these questions to yourself before it's your turn to putt, you can have a clearer and more precise way to just step up, sink it in. Obviously, if it's a course that you're playing blind, perhaps you won't know if there's a low ceiling, or you won't know that where your lie is, you actually have to a 1 foot uphill putt. But you can start gathering, what's the wind today? See if there are trees around, and start just piecing it together a little bit. And you might have a little bit of surprise thinking you might have skipped a little bit further, but at least you've done possibly half the thinking of what you need to do to have the best angle to get it in, and hopefully be scoring some birdies, because us AMs need as many as we can get. Well, thank you guys for the opportunity to share some tips, and have a great podcast.
Hey, thanks, Christopher, for sending that in. If you want to be featured on the podcast, just send in your recording to thegrind.dg@gmail.com. We can use all the help we can get. David, what did you think of that?
I liked it. I think the less that you have to think about when you're approaching the putting green, the better, because you want to go up there without having as much to think about and just trying to cash your putt. And you have so much time when you're waiting for everybody to get their shots done, when you're walking to the basket. If you have your game plan, your basic ideas in mind, whatever the wind is, or if you're going to be behind a bush, whatever it might be, if you have all those concepts built in of how you're going to approach the shot, going into it, putting uphill, whatever it might be, it's way less to think about as you're actually stepping up to the putt. And I think that's setting yourself up for success. You can take that approach across disc golf. I love that he shared this, because I think the more that we can simplify the game and think ahead, so we're not having to think so much in the moment, it simplifies the game for us as amateurs.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times if you don't take this approach, which I am guilty of this all the time, you feel rushed in your putt because you took a while to figure out what you're going to do. And so then you may ignore your pre-shot routine, or you may adjust it in some way that actually throws off your hey, I'm just going to put the disc in the basket. So I like this idea of putting some parentheses around when do you think about your putt? Well, initially you're going to think about it once you have a putt whatever that is, upshot or drive. Hey, I know I've got a putt. I usually add about 5 to 10 feet from how far I think I have to putt, so I'm not disappointed. So if I think I've got a 15-footer, I'm like, oh yeah, 25 to 30-footer, something like that, in order to try to just mentally trick myself. If I walk up and it's a 15-footer, I feel more confident. But then I like this idea of, okay, I'm probably going to have to straddle out, or I'm going to have to take a knee. I'm going to have a normal-ish putt, but it's going to be a bit of a crosswind or headwind, etc., and kind of taking a moment to think through that putt, all the potential of it, and then stopping thinking about it until you're up there. And then you're only having to make an adjustment from what you already thought about, if anything. Oh, it's a 15-footer, not a 25-footer, or, oh, I don't actually need to straddle, or I actually need to do a knee putt, or whatever that is. I think that will speed up your decision-making on the green, and it will also, I think, make you feel more relaxed or confident. So I'm going to try to apply this, because I think this is super helpful.
Yeah, I like that Christopher brought in a mental component to the game, because I think so much we get so fixated on. And we've talked about mental components of the game often on the podcast, but as an amateur, it's so easy to get caught up in what we can do physically that we forget that a lot of our mistakes are made in the mental side of the game. And I think if we can be ahead of the game mentally, then it's, again, going to make the game a lot more simple for ourselves, that we're just letting the mechanics kind of do the work. Yeah,
and I think so much of disc golf is choosing when you focus and when you think. And I think trying not to do both those things at the same time. So, hey, this drive is coming up. I need to throw a hyzer flip down this tight tunnel. I want to pick this disc based on this wind. If you're doing that on the tee pad, or once somebody's like, hey, you're throwing, get up there and throw, man. We're waiting on you. Whatever it is, like, same thing with a putt. I feel like a lot of times that does influence the actual performance of the shot. And I'd say also, like, if you're trying to focus all the time during the round, you're going to be worn out. So being able to selectively strategize and selectively focus on the actual execution of the shot, I feel like is huge. And having some kind of system by which you do that, I think is going to be helpful. And so I definitely want to apply this. And I think also I'm going to try to apply it in other areas as well. But putting, I think, is an easy way to start for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
That's it for this episode. Be sure to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We haven't gotten one in a while, so we'd love to get your feedback, and that helps people find the show. If you want to get a bonus podcast every week, become a patron at patreon.com/thegrinddg. And as always, whether it's coffee or disc golf, don't forget to enjoy the grind.